The bag moved. That's the first thing I noticed, not the smell, which was bad enough to make my horse Delphi snort and step sideways. Not the shape of it, which was wrong. The size of a small person, tied at the top with cord, left in the ditch alongside the road out of Calhorn Creek like someone's unwanted rubbish. The bag moved. Just once. A small shifting under the burlap, slow as a man breathing underwater. I pulled Delphi to a stop. Now I want to be honest with you here. I am not a heroic man. I am not the kind of man who rides into towns and fixes things. I am the kind of man who keeps his head down, shoes horses, eats his supper alone, and minds every inch of his own business. That had kept me alive 34 years, and I had no argument with the arrangement. But the bag moved. I sat there on Delphi for a good long minute, watching. The evening light was going orange over the ridge to the west. Flies had already found whatever was in that ditch. I could hear them even from the road, that low, ugly hum they make when they've found something they want. I climbed down. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a dog someone had tried to drown. Maybe something already past saving, and all I'd have to do is a kindness and be done with it. I pulled my knife and cut the cord at the top. I pulled the burlap open. She looked up at me. Dark eyes, both of them swollen near shut. A cut across her cheekbone that had stopped bleeding but only barely. Her hair, dark, thick, matted to the side of her face. She was maybe 25, maybe younger. It was hard to tell with the damage that had been done to her. She had her knees drawn up to her chest, and her arms wrapped around them, and she was shaking so hard the whole bag had been trembling from it. Not dead. Not even close to giving up from the look in those eyes. The only thing I could think of. I said, "You want out of there?" She didn't say anything, but she put her hand up. I took it. Her name was Nora. She told me that much on the ride back to my property, and then she didn't say anything else for 2 days. I set her up in the room I used for storage, the only room besides mine and the washroom, with a clean bedroll and a lamp turned low, and I brought her food at intervals and didn't ask anything of her, which I think confused her some, because every time I came in she would pull herself up against the wall and watch me the whole time I was there, the way a wild thing watches something it hasn't decided is safe yet. I understood that. I left the food and I left. On the third morning I found her in my kitchen. She had made coffee. She was sitting at the table with a cup, both hands wrapped around it, and she was looking out the window at the yard, where Delphi was watching her from the fence, ears forward, curious. The bruising on her face had gone dark purple and yellow at the edges, which meant it was healing. She had braided her hair. I said, "Good morning," and poured myself a cup and sat down across from her, and that was that. We were quiet together for a while. The good kind of quiet, or at least not the bad kind. She said, "You haven't asked me what happened." I said, "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." She looked at me for a moment, like she was checking something. "3 men," she said. "I worked at the Elmore Hotel, laundering. I saw one of them take something from the room of a man who'd been staying there. I told the man what I saw. The 3 of them decided to make sure I didn't say it to anyone else." I watched my coffee. "Did it work?" She almost smiled. It pulled at the cut on her cheek and she stopped, but it had been there a second. "Apparently not." "The man you told," I said. "Did he help you?" "He had already checked out of the hotel by the time they came for me." I nodded. I didn't say anything about what kind of man checks out of a hotel and leaves a woman to the consequences of her honesty, because Nora clearly already knew what kind of man that was, and she didn't need me to lay it out for her. She asked me if she could stay until her face healed up enough to travel. I said she could stay as long as she liked. I meant it the way you mean something practical. She needed a safe place. I had a place. That was the whole of it. I told myself that very firmly on the walk back out to the yard. I almost believed it. The problem with Cow Creek, and there were several problems with Calhorn Creek, not all of them new, was that it was a small town, and small towns have long sight lines. By the end of the first week, people knew she was at my property. I'm not sure how. Possibly the widow Clasp, who lived a mile down the road and had a gift for noticing things that weren't her concern. Possibly just the arithmetic of it. I'd bought more food than usual at the dry goods, and I'd asked the doctor, Halverson, to come by and look at a wound on a patient, which was a thing I had never done before in 6 years of living there. Halverson didn't say much when he came. He examined Nora's face and the bruising across her ribs, 3 of which were cracked. It turned out, which explained why she moved so carefully. And he gave her a salve and told me the ribs just needed time. And when he was leaving, he stopped at the door and said, quietly, so she wouldn't hear from the other room, "You know whose men those were." I said I suspected. "Ren Collier," he said. "He owns the Elmore, half the county if you listen to him." He paused. He was an old man, Halverson. He'd been a doctor in that town longer than the town had a proper name. "She's trouble for you, Eli. She's a woman with cracked ribs," I said. He put his hat on. "Yes." And Ren Collier's men did the cracking. He left. I went back inside and sat down at the table, and Nora came out of the storage room and looked at me and said, "He told you to send me away. He told me you were trouble." She stood in the doorway, her arms folded, careful of the ribs. "I am trouble," she said. She said it like she was apologizing, and also like she was furious, both at once, which was a thing I was learning Nora could do without apparent effort. I know that. I knew it the moment I opened my mouth in that hotel. "Then why did you?" A long pause. "Because the man who was robbed had a face like my grandfather." She looked out the window. "I know that's foolish." "I don't think it's foolish," I said. She looked back at me, studying me again, same as she'd done from the bedroll on the first day. "You're a strange man," she said. "Not unkind, just observational, I've been told. The men from Calhorn Creek came on a Thursday, not Collier's men, town men. 4 of them, on horseback. And I saw them coming from the yard where I was working on Delphi's near foreleg, which had been giving her trouble all week." I straightened up and waited. Their spokesman was a man named Abbott, who ran the feed store and served on the town council, and had always been pleasant enough to me in a distant sort of way that meant he thought I was acceptable but not interesting. He was pleasant now, too, in the same distant way, except underneath it was something harder and more scared. He said the town had heard I was keeping a woman at my property. I said that was accurate. He said the woman had caused a problem with Ren Collier. I said that was also accurate, though I might have worded it differently. Abbott leaned on his saddle horn and looked pained. "Ellie," he said, "you're a good man. You're a reasonable man. This isn't your fight. Didn't say it was. Then you understand that it'd be better, for everyone, if she moved on." He paused. "Or if she were returned to the town so things could be settled." I looked at the 4 of them. "Settled," I said. Abbott's jaw moved. "Collier just wants to talk to her." I thought about the burlap bag, the flies, the way she had looked up at me from inside it, not asking to be saved, exactly. More like making an assessment of whether I was worth the risk of putting her hand up. "Tell Collier," I said, "that there's nobody here he needs to concern himself with." Abbott frowned. "She's there, Eli." I said nobody he needs to concern himself with. I looked at him evenly. I'd take that message carefully. The 4 of them exchanged looks. Abbott opened his mouth and shut it again. They rode back. I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment and breathed very slowly, and then Nora came out of the storage room and said, "I heard. I know. They'll come back. Collier's men this time, not town men. Likely." She stood there, her ribs were better. She'd been moving freely the past few days, helping with small things around the property, which she did without asking my permission, and without explaining herself, which I respected. She'd been eating. The bruising had faded to something she could have passed off in bad light. "I should leave," she said. "You could," I said, "or you could not." She looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted in her face that I couldn't name. She said carefully, "Why are you doing this?" I thought about it. I'm not a man who talks much, and I'm even less a man who talks about himself. And this felt like the kind of territory that could go badly wrong in several directions. But she had asked me straight, and she deserved a straight answer. "First day I came to this town," I said, "I needed a place to stay while I got set up. Halverson let me sleep in his stable for 3 weeks and wouldn't take money for it." I looked at the window. Just seemed like the thing a person does. Nora was quiet. "Also," I said, "I'm not particularly afraid of Ren Collier." "You should be," she said softly. "Maybe." I looked back at her. "But I find I'm less afraid of him than I am of what I'd think of myself if I handed you over." She didn't say anything for a moment. Her throat moved. "You're a strange man," she said again. "You mentioned that." Something close to a real smile this time. Just a small one, and careful but there. Collier's men came on a Saturday, which surprised me because it seemed like the kind of thing you'd do, under cover of dark and Saturday afternoon. Was bright and flat and offered no cover at all. 4 of them, different from the town men. Bigger, harder looking, with the kind of eyes that have done things, and don't much think about them. I was on the porch. I had my rifle. I want to be clear that I am not a violent man. I have been in exactly 2 fights in my life, both of them unavoidable, and neither of them won cleanly. But I can shoot. I learned early, and practiced long. And there is a difference, in a standoff, between a man who is holding a rifle for show and a man who is holding one because he knows how to use it. And that difference communicates itself without anyone having to say a word. They stopped at the gate. The one in front. I didn't know his name, said Collier wanted the woman. I said I didn't have any woman for Collier. Collier knew she was there. I said Collier was welcome to his opinions. A long pause. The 4 horses shifted and stamped. This don't end here, he said. Probably not, I agreed. They rode off. I waited until they were small in the distance, and then I went inside and sat down at the table, and my hands were shaking, which I had not let them do outside. And Nora came and sat across from me without a word and poured me coffee and set it in front of me. We sat there together until the shaking stopped. What happened with Collier is a longer story than I want to tell here, and parts of it are not mine to tell anyway. The short version is this. The man whose room had been robbed, the one who had looked like Nora's grandfather, was not as easy to disappear as Collier had counted on. He'd been a judge, retired, traveling through, and when he got back to his destination and discovered his legal documents were missing, he sent letters. Several of them, and the replies that came back pointed, eventually, to Calhorn Creek, and to the Elmore Hotel, and to Ren Collier. Nora wrote a statement. She did it herself, at my kitchen table, in a clear, careful hand, 7 pages, without asking me to help her with the wording or look it over or anything. She just wrote it and dried the ink and folded it and gave it to the man who came to ask for it and looked him in the eye the whole time. That was October. By December, Collier was in a federal facility 4 counties over, and 2 of his 3 men were with him, and the 3rd had made himself difficult to find. I have been trying to get to the part I want to tell you, and I keep circling around it, which is not like me. I am a direct man, but this part I keep wanting to approach sideways, because it is the part that matters most, and I don't want to get it wrong. It was a Wednesday in November. Cold, but the good kind, clear and dry, the kind of cold that makes everything sharp and bright. Nora had been staying in my storage room for 3 months by then, and it was not, truthfully, my storage room anymore. She had made it her own in the gradual way she did things. A curtain she'd sewn from an old shirt of mine that I hadn't asked for back. A small shelf she'd built herself from scrap wood, using my tools, without asking permission. 2 river stones she'd picked up somewhere and set on the windowsill for no reason I could see, except that she liked them there. She had taken over the cooking. This had happened so slowly that I hadn't noticed it happening. First she'd helped. Then she'd helped more. Then, one day, I had gone to make supper and found it already on the stove. And that had become the arrangement. And it was a better arrangement than the previous one by a considerable margin. Because Nora could cook, and I mostly couldn't. We had taken to sitting on the porch in the evenings. Not talking, mostly. Just watching light change over the ridge and listening to the sounds of the yard settling and drinking whatever there was to drink. It was comfortable. I had not had comfortable company before, not like that, and I hadn't known I was missing it until it was there. That Wednesday evening, she said, "I've been thinking." I said, "All right. The weather's going to hold another few weeks." She had her cup in both hands, the way she always did. I could probably travel in another few weeks. I kept my eyes on the ridge. You could. A long pause. "I don't know where I'd go," she said. Another pause. "Do you want to go?" I asked. She thought about it. She was always honest with her thinking, Nora. She didn't rush to an answer when she didn't have one yet. "No," she said. The ridge was going orange. Delphi snorted somewhere in the yard. "Then you don't have to," I said. Another long pause, longer than the others. "Ellie," she said. "Yeah, I need you to understand I'm not." She stopped. "I'm not something that needs to be kept. I'm not something to take care of. I can work. I can contribute. I can. Nora, I said. She stopped. I know that, I said. You're the least helpless person I have ever met. You were shaking in a burlap bag in a ditch, and your first thought was to make an assessment of whether I was trustworthy, which, I'll tell you, most people don't have the composure for that. I heard her breath catch, just slightly. I'm asking you to stay, I said, because I like you here, because the mornings are better with coffee that someone else made, because Delphi likes you, and Delphi's opinion matters to me, because I have lived 6 years in a place without anybody I could be quiet with, and I hadn't known what that cost until you showed up. I turned and looked at her. Not because you need keeping, because I'd like the company. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes in the evening light dark and considering. That's a lot of words, she said. For a quiet man. Saved them up. She looked back at the ridge. She was fighting the smile again. I could see it. This time she let it come. I'll stay through winter, she said. All right, and then we'll see. That's fair. Delphi snorted again, which I took as agreement. She stayed through winter. Spring came, and we didn't discuss whether she was staying anymore, because that particular question had answered itself in the way those questions sometimes do, quietly and without fanfare, in the space between two people who have gotten used to each other and don't see any reason to stop. In April, she moved out of the storage room. We got married in May, in Halverson's front parlor, with Halverson's wife as witness. And afterward, we had supper at our kitchen table, and she made a pie from dried apples, because that was what we had, and it was the best pie I had ever eaten, which I told her, and she said that was a low bar given what she'd seen me eat, and I said that was fair, and we laughed about that. I am not a man who uses words like grace, but I have thought about it since. About that Wednesday evening, about the ridge going orange, about the careful way she let the smile come out. And grace is the only word that fits the thing I felt. Not luck, not fortune. Nora would have been fine without me. She would have found her way out of that ditch eventually, one way or another, because that is who she is. She didn't need saving, but she stayed. She stayed, and the mornings got better, and Delphi got more sociable, and the house stopped feeling like a place I was just existing in, and started feeling like a place I lived. That's the whole story, near enough. I still shoe horses. She is currently, as I speak, built a second hunt shelf in what used to be the storage room, using my tools without asking, which is still fine, and there is something on the stove that smells like it's going to be considerably better than anything I'd have made myself. The bag moved. That's where it started. I am glad every single morning that I climbed down.